Usually when we talk about a massive, culture-stopping moment, the
Yeah.
kind that just completely dominates the zeitgeist, we're talking about, like, a blockbuster movie premiere.
Right, or maybe a really shocking election.
Yeah, exactly, or a monumental sports upset. But back in 2006, one of the most bizarre and honestly surprisingly emotional cultural moments in America centered entirely around a jagged freezing rock.
Floating billions of miles away in deep space.
Yes, I am, of course, talking about the demotion of Pluto.
Oh, man, yeah. The International Astronomical Union, the IAU, they held this vote at their assembly in Prague. And literally, with the drop of a gavel, Pluto was officially excommunicated.
Excommunicated from the planetary fraternity.
Right, stripped of a status that for decades was, it was almost mythological to the public.
The public outrage was completely incredible. I mean, people were printing bumper stickers that said, Pluto was framed and stop planetary discrimination.
I remember those.
Yeah. And there was a Facebook group called When I Was Your Age, Pluto Was a Planet that just organically gained 1.5 million members.
Wow, 1.5 million.
Yeah, and the American Dialect Society even made Pluto their 2006 word of the year.
Like to be demoted or devalued.
Exactly. The state of New Mexico, where Pluto's discoverer had worked, they literally passed a unanimous resolution declaring March 13th Pluto Planet Day.
That is amazing.
It really is. People weren't just confused by the scientific ruling. They were, actually grieving.
And that emotional intensity, that genuine sense of loss and anger over an ice rock, it's the perfect entry point for what we are exploring today.
Because that outrage highlights a massive widening chasm. Today, we're going to figure out how the country that split the atom, decoded the human genome, walked on the moon, how it became a place where half the population feels completely alienated from the people wearing the lab coats.
This huge shift.
It really is. And to help us navigate this strange reality, this deep dive is custom-tailored for you, pulling from an incredibly insightful book called Unscientific America, How Scientific Illiteracy Threatens Our Future.
Yeah, written by Chris Mooney and Sheril Kirshenbaum.
Right, and they actually embody the kind of cultural bridge building we're going to be talking about today. Chris is a seasoned journalist, and his biologist grandfather casually referred to Charles Darwin as Chuck at the dinner table.
I love that detail.
Yeah.
And Sheril is a marine biologist who studied the population dynamics of sea cucumbers, and this is great, she also spent time working as a top 40 pop radio DJ.
So they really understand both the rigor of the laboratory and the pulse of pop culture.
Exactly. And to really understand how those two worlds separated, we need to look closely at the mechanics of that 2006 Prague assembly.
Right, because the IAU didn't just wake up and decide to bully Pluto out of malice.
No, not at all. Astronomers were facing a genuine taxonomic crisis. They had discovered another distant object in the Kuiper Belt named Eris.
Originally nicknamed Xena, right?
Yes, Xena. And it was actually larger than Pluto. So the scientific community hit this crossroads. They either had to admit Eris and potentially, dozens of other newly discovered ice dwarfs into the planetary club, or create a stricter definition of a planet.
Which would inevitably leave Pluto out in the cold.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the backlash wasn't just coming from the general public buying T-shirts.
Yeah.
Even prominent scientists were furious at how this was handled.
Oh, absolutely.
Like Alan Stern, the chief scientist on NASA's New Horizons mission, which, by the way, was literally flying a probe to Pluto at that exact moment, he said, quote, "I'm embarrassed for astronomy."
Yeah, because he pointed out the procedural absurdity of it all. Less than 5% of the world's astronomers actually voted on this ruling.
Less than 5%. And it became an instant punchline on late-night TV. I mean, Stephen Colbert joked that science opted to cut and run and force Pluto to join its own kind in a, quote, separate but equal outer solar system. Right. It's like a diehard sports fan waking up to find out the fundamental rules of baseball were suddenly changed overnight by some secret committee operating behind closed doors.
It feels like a violation of fair play.
Exactly. It triggers our innate love for the underdog.
Well, what's fascinating here is that reaction, it completely shatters a long-held myth within the scientific community.
Which myth is that?
Scientists often lament that the public simply doesn't care about science. But the Pluto saga proves the exact opposite. Millions of people cared deeply.
Yeah, they really did.
But they reacted with anger because the scientific community appeared to operate entirely top-down, handing down this arbitrary decree from an ivory tower without involving society in the process at all.
It didn't feel like an exciting scientific discovery. It felt like a semantic, bureaucratic ruling by an elite exclusionary club.
Precisely.
And that sets up the grand irony of America's position in the world today. I mean, we have a federal research infrastructure funded to the tune of well over $100 billion a year.
Which is massive.
It is. This is the financial engine that created the internet. Yet we have a populace where just 18% of people say they personally know a scientist.
18%.
Think about that. And when polled, 44% of Americans couldn't even name a scientific role model.
And the ones who did manage to give an answer?
They named Al Gore, Bill Gates, or Albert Einstein, who, as brilliant as he was, has been dead for decades.
Right, so we lead the world in scientific output, yet we have a populace largely disconnected from the actual humans doing the work.
So if the public does care, which, again, Pluto proves they do, why do scientists constantly fall back on complaining that the public is just ignorant?
Well, that instinct points us toward a fundamental flaw in how the scientific community has historically viewed the rest of society.
Whenever there's friction between science and society, the default response from the scientific community is to blame scientific illiteracy.
Right. They pull out these terrifying, widely publicized statistics.
Yeah. For example, half of American adults don't know that the Earth orbits the sun once a year.
Wait, really? Half?
Half. Or they point out that 80% of Americans can't read the New York Times science section because they just completely drown in the technical jargon.
And those statistics are the foundation of what scholars call the deficit model.
The deficit model?
Yeah, this incredibly pervasive yet totally flawed idea that the public is simply a collection of empty vessels suffering from a deficit of knowledge.
The assumption being that if we just pour enough raw facts into their heads, they will naturally agree with scientific consensus.
Exactly. And in its more cynical form, it devolves into the "you're an idiot" model.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, where experts basically roll their eyes, marvel at the ignorance of the masses, and assume people just aren't smart enough to grasp the concepts.
But wait, I have to push back on this a little bit.
Okay, go for it.
Isn't a lack of basic facts the root problem? I mean, if literally half the country doesn't know the mechanics of the Earth orbiting the sun, doesn't that entirely justify scientists treating this as a massive education deficit?
I see what you mean.
Right. Like, if someone fails a third-grade science pop quiz, how can they participate in complex policy decisions?
This raises an important question, and it's exactly why the deficit model is so seductive. It feels completely logical.
Right.
But giving people a pop quiz on orbital mechanics or, the atomic weight of carbon, that doesn't actually prepare them to navigate the incredibly complex modern debates we face today.
Okay, how so?
Well, knowing that the Earth goes around the sun does not equip you to evaluate the epistemology behind a sophisticated argument about global warming models or, say, mRNA vaccine efficacy.
That's a really fair point.
Especially when bad actors are using highly technical, peer-reviewed sounding language to spread misinformation. The problem isn't a lack of trivia memorization. The problem is a lack of critical integration.
Understanding how science works as a process,
Yeah.
not just what facts it produces.
Exactly.
That helps explain the wild paradox the authors point out regarding the highly informed but wrong citizen.
Oh, yeah, this is crucial.
If sheer ignorance was the only problem, then the people spreading anti-science views would just be uneducated people making random guesses. But they aren't.
Not at all.
Look at the vaccine autism myth.
Yeah.
You have people like celebrity Jenny McCarthy, who proudly claims she got her degree from the, quote, University of Google.
Right.
The parents involved in these movements are highly motivated, deeply engaged, and doing hours and hours of independent research. They are reading studies.
They are doing the work, absolutely. But they are trapped in a self-reinforcing echo chamber of motivated reasoning.
Which just feeds their confirmation bias.
Exactly. Confirmation bias leads them to highly sophisticated literature that supports their fears. Or consider the late Michael Crichton.
The guy who wrote Jurassic Park.
Yeah, him. He was a brilliant Harvard-educated medical doctor, researcher, and filmmaker. He understood the scientific method intimately. Yet he wrote State of Fear, a wildly popular revisionist novel that aggressively attacked global warming science.
Oh, wow, I didn't realize that.
You cannot call Michael Crichton ignorant. He didn't have a knowledge deficit. He used narrative to fight data. So if intelligent, highly engaged people are doing the research and still landing on aggressively anti-science conclusions, the problem isn't their brains.
It's the water they're swimming in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Where are they actually going for this information?
Which means we have to look at the fractured landscape of our culture. Back in 1959, a British novelist and physics-chemist named C.P. Snow gave a famous speech called The Two Cultures.
Ah,
He painted this vivid picture of Western intellectual life being split into two distinct groups, the sciences and the humanities. Imagine a 1950s academic cocktail party where the physicists are standing by the window, the poets are clustered around the punch bowl, and there is a massive gulf of mutual incomprehension between them.
they literally cannot speak the same language.
Right.
Snow's observation was revolutionary then, but Mooney and Kirshenbaum argue it requires a drastic update for the 21st century.
Because it's gotten worse.
Much worse. Science is no longer just isolated from the humanities department at a university. It has been completely walled off from the multiple dominant cultures that actually dictate everyday American life.
Like the media, politics, entertainment, religion.
Exactly. If we start with the media diet, the landscape is incredibly bleak. The Project for Excellence in Journalism found that out of 5 hours of cable news, only 1 minute is devoted to science and technology.
1 minute out of 5 hours.
1 minute. Compare that to 10 minutes for celebrity gossip, 12 for disasters, and 26 minutes for crime.
And on the print side is just as barren. I mean, between 1989 and 2005, the number of newspapers featuring weekly science sections shrank by 2/3, dropping from 95 down to 34.
It's a huge drop.
Massive outlets like CNN and the Boston Globe completely gutted their dedicated science units. And here's where it gets really interesting, because it's not that scientific discovery stopped happening. It's like science is broadcasting vital, life-saving information on an FM frequency. But the media, politics, and the general public are entirely tuned to AM radio.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
The signal's transmitting, but nobody has the right receiver turned on.
That AM/FM visualization perfectly captures the structural failure. Mainstream media has essentially put the public on a science starvation diet.
A starvation diet.
Yeah, so when a complex scientific issue inevitably arises, say a pandemic or an energy crisis, the public lacks the baseline context to process it. That creates a massive vacuum.
And who fills that vacuum?
Well-funded, incredibly savvy fringe groups and anti-science lobbyists.
Of course.
These groups understand the AM frequency perfectly. They know how algorithms favor outrage. They know how to use narrative and emotional framing to dictate a debate, while the scientists are still drafting dense, jargon-filled white papers that no one reads.
The disconnect isn't just in the media either. It bleeds directly into our political culture. Look at the Science Debate 2008 initiative.
Oh, that was such a missed opportunity.
It really was. This was a massive grassroots push to get presidential candidates to participate in a dedicated debate on science policy. It had the backing of dozens of Nobel laureates, over 100 university presidents, major scientific institutions, and 38,000 individual supporters.
An unprecedented mobilization of the scientific community trying to engage the political sphere.
And the politicians largely ignored it.
They did, because the refusal to engage stems from a deep historical current of anti-intellectualism in American politics. The historian Richard Hofstadter documented this extensively.
What did he find?
Politicians are often terrified of looking like out-of-touch eggheads.
Eggheads.
Yeah. In the political theater, an elected official would much rather appeal to practical, can-do common sense or, folksy wisdom than risk getting bogged down in theoretical science and appearing elitist to their constituents.
I want to pause here for a second and make something very clear to you, the listener, regarding the political history covered in our sources. The authors explicitly point out that during the Bush administration, there were widespread instances of the government suppressing global warming research and stem cell science.
Right.
And they note that the incoming Obama administration pledged to restore science to its rightful place. Now, we are simply outlining the author's historical analysis of these administrations, not endorsing a political side.
Exactly. We're just reporting what the book analyzes.
The crucial takeaway here is that the underlying cultural disconnect, the fear of the egghead, and the marginalization of science transcends any single presidency or political party.
Absolutely. The political alienation of science is entirely structural. It's built into the system. And if we pivot to entertainment, the cultural isolation is just as stark.
Oh, definitely.
When Hollywood does portray scientists, they rarely present them as fully realized human beings. They are reduced to lazy, easily digestible stereotypes.
Like the socially awkward geek in a lab coat.
Or the cold-hearted corporate villain, or the mad scientist hubristically playing God. Rarely do you see a narrative that treats the scientific process seriously while still being engaging.
And then, of course, there is religion, which might be the deepest and most volatile fissure of all.
Oh, for sure.
The authors point out a massive polarization that has completely hijacked the airspace. On one side, you have the new atheists, like Richard Dawkins, who use highly combative, dismissive rhetoric regarding faith.
Right.
On the other side, you have religious fundamentalists who outright reject basic biological consensus, like evolution. These two extremes completely dominate the cultural conversation.
Effectively squeezing out the vast middle ground where faith and science might actually coexist peacefully for millions of people.
Exactly.
When you look at how marginalized science is across media, politics, entertainment, and spiritual life, it begs a crucial historical question.
Well, is it always this way?
Exactly. Have scientists always been isolated in this ivory tower? The answer is definitively no. No. To understand how the scientific community became so structurally isolated, we have to rewind to an era when they were universally seen as the ultimate American heroes.
Oh, right. We have to look at the immediate aftermath of World War II.
World War II completely rewrote the American perception of the scientists.
They weren't seen as awkward geeks. They were the brilliant minds who developed radar, cracked enemy codes, and built the atomic bomb.
They literally helped save the free world from tyranny.
There is a fantastic quote in the book from a contemporary scientist who noted that after the war, physicists were, quote, exhibited as lions at Washington tea parties.
Lions. They possessed immense cultural cachet and political authority. In 1944, President Franklin D. Roosevelt recognized this incredible momentum.
Right. He asked Vannevar Bush, the director of the Wartime Office of Research and Development, to figure out how the scientific institutions that had won the war could be repurposed to serve the nation in peacetime.
And the resulting report was titled Science, the Endless Frontier.
That report fundamentally cemented the post-war consensus. The government agreed to heavily fund basic scientific research at universities across the country.
And the logic was brilliant in its simplicity.
Fund the smartest people, let them do their work without interference, and it will naturally lead to technological breakthroughs, better public health, and stronger national defense.
And then when the Soviet Union launched the Sputnik satellite in 1957...
terrifying the United States into the space race.
Exactly. That government funding just absolutely skyrocketed.
But this massive, unprecedented influx of funding created a severe unintended consequence.
Because scientists were suddenly given what amounted to a blank check by the federal government to stay in their labs, they were financially and professionally incentivized to hyper-specialize.
The culture of university science turned sharply inward. To understand why, you have to look at the academic mechanism of tenure, the publish or perish culture. Wait, so the greatest triumph of American science funding, the very system that built our modern technological world, actually laid the structural groundwork for today's massive cultural disconnect.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really did. Imagine you are a young, brilliant researcher in the mid-20th century trying to build your career. The academic system completely stopped rewarding public outreach or communication.
Wow.
If you took time away from your lab to write a popular science book or do a television interview, your peers viewed it with deep suspicion.
It was treated as a frivolous distraction from the real work of pure peer-reviewed research.
Exactly. The phrase, the Carl Sagan effect, was coined specifically to describe how scientists who became popular communicators were often penalized and denied tenure by their own departments.
That is so wild.
They built an ivory tower not out of arrogance, but because that is exactly what the economic and professional incentive structure rewarded. They lost the ability to translate the relevance of their work to the very taxpayers funding them.
Which brings us directly back to you, the listener. Mending this rift isn't just an abstract academic exercise. It is arguably the most urgent challenge we face in the coming decades.
Absolutely.
So what does this all mean? What does all this history and sociology actually mean for you today? It means that scientific illiteracy isn't about failing a middle school pop quiz on the solar system.
Right.
It is about a structural failure of communication. Society and science have lost the ability to talk to each other about the future. Whether you are prepping for a boardroom meeting, analyzing a new policy proposal, or just trying to navigate the daily flood of your newsfeed, understanding how information is siloed helps you see past the noise.
It's a crucial skill.
When you see a fiery scientific debate on cable news, you can now recognize the underlying mechanics. You can spot if you're watching a deficit model failure, the results of a media starvation tactic, or an epistemological echo chamber in real time.
We desperately need more people to be able to decode that noise because the stakes are accelerating rapidly.
Oh, for sure.
The book leaves us with a stark, forward-looking warning about the controversies that are coming next. We aren't just going to be debating climate models or vaccine efficacy.
What's next?
We are approaching an era where we will be debating the creation of synthetic microbes in laboratories. We will be facing technologies that offer artificial life extension or the ability to design and edit the genetic traits of our children.
Wow.
We are even looking at geoengineering, the literal altering of the Earth's atmosphere to artificially control the weather.
Which is simultaneously terrifying and amazing. And it leaves you with a profound final thought to mull over.
Yeah.
If our society and our scientific community are already this divided, this prone to misinformation, and this emotionally incapable of communicating over the classification of a harmless, jagged little ice rock billions of miles away like Pluto.
What exactly is going to happen when we have to decide who gets to control the weather?
Right. Or who gets to write the genetic code of future generations?
Right.
Who gets a seat at that table?
Navigating those realities requires science and society to finally sit at the same table, tuned to the exact same frequency.
As you go about your week, keep questioning the sources you consume, check which frequency you're attuned to, and maybe give a little thought to our old friend Pluto. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.